All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about the revival of eugenics. We are currently seeing the beginning stages of the revival of eugenics. And this revival is being done by people who are famous influencers online. One of them is Chris Williamson. Chris Williamson is a famous a podcaster. He is an influencer. He is connected with Joe Rogan. So he's pretty famous and he has an agenda. And that agenda is eugenics. And I want to give you guys some examples here because this really is a reflection of this revival of eugenics that we are currently seeing in our own time. So here is Chris Williamson talking to an Irish eugenist by the name of Gregory Clark, and it's quite disturbing and ironic, I must say, that an Irishman would be promoting eugenics because back in the day, the English eugenists, and by back in the day, I mean back in the 1800s, the English eugenists were calling the Irish people genetically inferior. So it's pretty disturbing and ironic that you see Irish people pushing eugenics, but anyway, here we go. Here is this clip.
I don't disagree. I do think that it plays into, at least the use of growth hormone plays into the highly environmental, highly culturally influenced, non-behavioral genetic, non-genetic determinism view of the world. I think that the upper classes are going to have to square the circle of accepting behavioral genetics as powerful of a force that it is, because publicly the luxury belief that is often put forward is, you know, we just need to do more welfare and we need to do so on and so forth, and it doesn't really matter, you know, you haven't got this determinism through genetics and stuff. That's perilously close to eugenics. That sounds an awful lot like something that Adolf Hitler would have spoken about.
So just to stop here real quick, he is anticipating the arguments that are used against the eugenist ideology. So he's saying, okay, well, the belief that certain people are poor because they're not getting enough help and they just need a helping hand from the government. They need some welfare. That's what these people need. And what the eugenists are arguing, what the social Darwinists are arguing, is that these people are not poor because they lack help from the government. They're poor because their genes have made them poor. They do not have the genetic wiring to be successful, and so they're in poverty. And really, in this eugenist utopian vision, genetic engineering is seen as a solution to society's problems. And so you have all these poor people. Well, they're poor because their genetics are inferior. So what do? Well, we have to prevent those genes from being perpetuated. We have to prevent those genes from being passed on. Well, how do these genes get passed on? Well, we all know how. Poor people have sex, and then they have these kids with their genes that hardwire them to be poor. Well, how do we prevent this? Well, we have to prevent these people from having kids. Oh, let's rewind back to the mid-20th century. Let's go back to the policies of forcing certain people to be sterilized, which they were conducting back in the 1920s in the United States. They were forcing certain people to be sterilized because those people were deemed as having inferior genes, and they said, we don't want those genes being passed down. So in the eugenist worldview, genes are seen as everything, and genetic engineering is seen as really the ultimate solution to society's problems, or much of society's problems. So poor people are poor because of their genes. How do we prevent poverty? Well, we just prevent the poor people genes from being passed down. How do we do that? Well, we prevent certain people from having kids. So these people will sit there and come across as just these iconoclasts of society, questioning the mainstream view. The mainstream view is that eugenics are bad and evil, and yes, they are bad and evil. Eugenics is bad and evil, absolutely. And so they try to present this image of themselves as people who are simply questioning the mainstream view, or they are defying the mainstream view, and they just want to start this conversation about behavior and genetics and intelligence and genetics. But really, if these people get ultimate power, they will be tyrannical, they will be despotic, they will be oppressive, they will be evil and destructive. Because we have read the history, everyone. History repeats. History rhymes. History is like a wheel that turns. And if you just look at the history that was done, the history that already occurred back in the 20th century, we see what? Eugenics in the mainstream, eugenics being a very popular ideology, eugenics already at that time period, because back in the day, people were, people have this view that back in the 20th century, people were more Christian and all that stuff, but back in those times, already eugenics was popular. Eugenics was popular. And so what was going on? People believed in this idea that the state could then enforce eugenic policy. And then the Germans took it. And they began to do mandatory sterilizations. But they didn't stop there. They began to exterminate people because they believed that those people were genetically inferior. So we can sit here and say, oh, well, they're just having a discussion and it's just a talk about how we need to question the mainstream view and we need to acknowledge genetics and people's behavior. That's all that's going on here. But they're talking about embryo selection, and they're saying that people who do not participate in embryo selection are eventually going to fall behind those who do. They're pushing this Darwinistic ideology. And what would be the end result of this ideology if these people take power? It's not going to be pretty. We have seen this story before. And we know how it ends. It ends with destruction and immense human suffering. It's not good. Let's play on.
Meanwhile, they're mating assortatively, but they are going to have to ultimately put their money where their mouth is with regards to this, because if certain families that decide to use embryo selection and then maybe even gene enhancement, embryo enhancement techniques, they're going to fall behind. It's an arms race.
So the families that just believe in the typical view that, well, eugenics is bad and that's like Nazism, they're going to fall behind those who participate in embryo selection. Now, what is embryo selection? Embryo selection is this process where they take a bunch of sperms and eggs and put them together and they produce them in a lab, and then the doctor or whoever, the genetic specialist, says, okay, this embryo here has the genes for really, really good intelligence. This person's going to be really smart. And so the parents say, okay, we want that embryo. The woman says, put that embryo in me. The rest of the embryos, you just throw them away. You put them all down the rubbish bin. Now, if this barbaric act becomes mainstream, don't be surprised if they apply the same mentality to already born people, in which they would say, well, this person here, he has the genetic characteristics of intelligence. He is a very intelligent person. He is genetically hardwired to have a high IQ. These people here, well, they're pretty stupid and their genetics are inferior and they're not very fit, and so you can put them down the waste bin. You can put them in the concentration camp. You can put them in the gas chamber. And so he is saying what? He's saying that the families that don't partake in genetic engineering are going to fall behind those who do. Well, these people, they believe in evolution. And what does evolution teach? Evolution teaches that we evolved in a process of millions of years in which humanoids were killing each other, and the humanoids who were fit, the humanoids who had the superior genes, killed those who had the unfit and the inferior genes, and then those with the fit genes mated and they passed their genes on. And this process went on and on and on for millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years or whatever, and then we evolved to what we are now. And so they believe that evolution is continuing on. This idea of evolution doesn't mean, well, we evolved and that's it, it stops here. No, in Darwinistic ideology, evolution is always continuing on. We are evolving. So how do we accelerate the process of evolution so that we can enter the next stage of human evolution? Well, genetic engineering. We get the best genes. We continue to perpetuate those genes. We do embryo selection, get the embryos with the fittest genes, kill off the rest. rest of the embryos, and then we just perpetuate the best genes. And so this is going to be the future, according to these people. They want embryo selection to be the future of human reproduction, and those who refuse to participate in this eugenics, in this genetic engineering, well, they're going to fall behind. And if these people get power, how are they going to see those who refuse to partake in eugenics? They're going to see those who refuse to participate in eugenics as those who are holding humanity back from evolving. They're going to say, well, listen, we're trying to enter the next step of human evolution. You guys don't want to get with the program. You're holding us back. You are impeding, you are hindering the process of human evolution, and they will see the people who refuse to participate in eugenics as an enemy. And they will call them immoral. They will say, well, don't you want the betterment of humanity? Don't you want humanity to transcend the current state that it's in? Don't you want human beings to better themselves in this process of evolution? Why are you holding us back? You are immoral. We're trying to make a society of fit human beings who are intelligent, who are athletic, who are better, who are superior than what we already are. And you're holding us back. You are immoral. You are an enemy to the body politic. And he says that those families who refuse or who don't participate in this genetic engineering, they're going to fall behind. Fall behind where? They're going to fall behind those who do participate in eugenics. And those who participate in eugenics are going to have the superior kids. And those kids who were born naturally, who weren't born through a process of human farming, well, they're going to be inferior to those who were born through this process of embryo selection. They're going to fall behind those who were basically farmed. Because those who were farmed, those kids who were farmed, in accordance to these lunatics, well, they're going to have these really good genes, and they're going to be very, very intelligent. And those who were born naturally, well, they're going to be inferior to those who were born in the lab, or who were conceived in the lab, who were farmed. Do you see the danger of all of this? It's the beginning of trying to push this dystopian, Brave New World insanity. Now I want to show you guys another video here. This is a Jewish eugenist by the name, he calls himself Jonathan Anomaly. Anomaly is not really his real last name. He changed his last name because we all know damn well that Anomaly ain't a real name. But anyway, they're talking about Christians who will refuse to participate in this eugenic insanity. And he says here, this guy, he's being interviewed, by the way, by Chris Williamson. This guy is saying that Christians are going to suffer for not participating in eugenics. Their children are going to suffer because they did not participate in eugenics. So in other words, Christian parents who don't partake in eugenics, who don't partake in embryo selection, their children are going to suffer because they did not have their kids farmed and conceived in a lab. So let's listen.
Now, with religious groups, I do worry that some are going to have a prohibition against this, and their kids, not in the first generation, but over 2 or 3 or 10 generations, could suffer serious genetic disadvantages because of the choices their parents made.
Huh. So why would that be? Oh, because the parents who conceived their kids in a lab, the parents who participate in embryo selection, they're going to have these kids who are genetically really fit, genetically very intelligent. And the Christians who refuse to participate in eugenics, well, they're going to have kids who are going to be, well, inferior to the kids who were farmed in a lab. So they're going to have genetic disadvantages. They are going to be genetically in a lower state than those kids who were farmed in this barbaric practice of embryo selection. Because the kids who would be conceived in a lab, they're going to be the most intelligent, they're going to be the most fit, they're going to be the most athletic, they're going to have the greatest genetic advantages. And those genetic advantages are going to put them at a place above the Christian kids. And so in this guy's sick worldview, the Christian kids are eventually going to be what? The genetically inferior people. And they are going to be lower in the scale. They're going to be lower in the scale to the kids who were farmed in a lab. Pretty sick stuff. And they're pushing this, they're really pushing for this dystopian, brave new world society. Now, I did some research on this guy, Jonathan Anomaly. Let me just make sure you guys can see the article here. And he wrote this article some time ago. And this was back in 2023, so last year. And look at what he says here. I highlighted this part. Embryo selection using genetic tests will soon allow parents to select against various diseases and in favor of aesthetic and cognitive traits. So you want to farm children who are super athletes, who are super geniuses, you can do it. Well, what about people who are going to refuse to participate in this stuff? Well, their kids are going to be at a disadvantage to those who were farmed in a lab, because those who are farmed in a lab, well, they're going to have the best genes. So the Christians are going to be considered what? Genetically inferior in this guy's sick utopianism. Here is another article written by this guy, and he wrote an article called The End of Sex. Yes, so basically he says sex is just going to be for pleasure, not for reproduction, and people are just going to be farmed in labs. That's right. It's like that scene. It's like that scene in The Matrix when Morpheus takes Neo to the desert of the real, and he says, "Welcome to the desert of the real." And he shows him all of these humans who are in these red capsules. And Morpheus says, "In this world, we are not born. We are grown." And look at what he says here. "We will still have sex, and we will still have children, but the link between the two will grow more tenuous. The prospect of artificial wombs," and he links an article here, "is likely to increase this gap even more. An obvious risk is that both sex and babies will be thought of in more instrumental and less romantic terms. An obvious benefit is that our children will have lower risks of disease." Now, he focuses on disease because in case anyone wants to object to his ideology, he can just say, well, I'm just trying to prevent diseases. But remember, here he talks about intelligence, and so they want to breed people for intelligence. They want to breed people who are super intelligent. And, you know, Elon Musk, he talks about the next step of human evolution, and he talks about his brain chip. And he says people who are not going to get his brain chip, well, they're not really going to be as good as those who do have the brain chip, because in Elon Musk's sick worldview, this brain chip is going to make people super intelligent. And he says that a computer programmer that has this brain chip is going to be able to program way faster than the programmer who is not going to have the brain chip, who doesn't have the brain chip. And so, in other words, in Elon Musk's ideology, those who don't get the brain chip, well, they're going to fall behind. And that's how these eugenists think. They think that if you don't get with the times, if you don't get with the program and conform to their agenda and participate in this eugenist ideology, that you are going to fall behind those who will participate in this ideology. So this is the article that Mr. Jonathan Anomaly linked, and look at this. I mean, this is so creepy. Look at this. Babies in jars being farmed. This is like the movie The Matrix when Morpheus brings Neo to the desert of the real. We are not born. We are grown. And this, the author of this article, his name is David Warmflash. And yeah, look that guy up. A real creep. Scientifically, it's called ectogenesis, a term coined by J.B.S. Haldane in 1924. A hugely influential science popularizer, Haldane did for his generation what Carl Sagan did later in the century. He got people thinking and talking about the implications of science and technology on our civilization, and did not shy away from inventing new words, blah, blah, blah. Describing ectogenesis as pregnancy occurring in an artificial environment from fertilization to birth. Haldane predicted that by 2074, this would account for more than 70% of human births. And so they want to make human farming into the mainstream. They want it to be the common way for human reproduction. So human beings are going to be farmed. They're not going to even be born. They're going to be grown like vegetables. And it's just sickening. I don't have to explain to you why this is weird, why this is sick, why this is dangerous. They have this idea of creating this society where everyone's going to be farmed in a lab. They're going to be bred to be super intelligent, super athletic, super fit, whatever, super successful. And so they think that this is the way forward in evolution because they believe in evolution. So because you believe in evolution, you believe that we are evolving. And in the theory of evolution, it says that human beings evolved in this millions of years process in which the lower forms of humans back in the day, the humanoids, they were killing each other. Neanderthals and humans were killing each other or whatever. These humanoid creatures, something that probably looked, I don't believe in evolution, but if you look at how they present these humanoids, they look like something that you would see in the film The Time Machine. But they believe that these humanoids were butchering each other, and the superior ones killed off the inferior ones, and then they passed down their genes. New generations were born, and then these humanoids still continued to kill each other. The fittest people killed and mated. The inferior ones were destroyed. Their genes were not allowed to get passed down. And then it just continued on. And so evolution is a process of just killing. And so if evolution is the process of killing and death, and the superior killing off the inferior, and the superior taking the resources, and the inferior starving to death, well then who is to say that this process cannot be pushed by artificial means, pushed by human hands? And so they want to accelerate the process of evolution. And because in these people's worldview, there is no God, so they don't have any sort of moral qualms against this sort of thing. And they hate God. They hate God because God is against them. And in fact, there is a verse in the Bible. It's not in the Protestant Bible, but it is in the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Bibles. In the book of Wisdom, chapter 2, it talks about how the wicked think. And it describes how the wicked think. And if you read that description, it is eerily close to Darwinism. And in the book of Wisdom, chapter 2, the wicked speak. And the wicked say, let us oppress the weak. Let's destroy the weak, because the weak are useless. And what is the Darwinian worldview? The stronger, the superior, the fittest, they take the resources because they're strong and they're fit. And those who are weak are deemed what? They are deemed as useless, not even worthy of life. And so if evolutionism is simply the process of killing and death, then we can simply accelerate that process. And so if they start to implement their utopianism, what about those who will refuse to participate in their ideology, in their sick paradigm? Well, the people who refuse, they're going to be seen as a hindrance to this process of evolution. And the people who are going to be farmed are going to be seen as those of superior genes, those of superior intelligence because of their genes, and those who will be born naturally, well, they're going to be seen as holding back this process of evolution. They have to be gotten rid of because they're inferior. We have to get rid of the inferior genes. And then we just go right back to the evils of history, right back to the evils of the 20th century. And I want to show you guys something else here. I saw this video a couple of days ago. This is from the Joe Rogan podcast. And this guy's talking about how AI has been used to dub Hitler's speeches to other languages, right? Dub Hitler's speeches to English, whatever. And so they're dubbing Hitler's speeches in English, and so people are now watching Hitler speak, and they're understanding him. Here, we'll just show you the speech real quick, and then we can look at the comments, which is what I'm really focusing on here. So here is Hitler speaking. They have him dubbed in English. Here we go.
So they could do that with Hitler.
For correctness, whether you believe that I have been diligent,
That's amazing.
that I have advocated for you in these years, that I have been decent, I have spent my time in service of my people. Now cast your vote. If yes, then stand up for me as I have stood up for you.
So before, they used to show these speeches in the History Channel, and they would just show the speeches. Hitler screaming in German, and then they show you the Holocaust and the pictures from the Holocaust and the footage from the Holocaust. And so people assumed that Hitler was just talking about how much he hated the Jews. But then you see this video, and then people start thinking, wait a second, those speeches sound really rational, and they sound inspiring, and they sound charismatic. And so this is a part of this trend that we're seeing of people being sympathetic to Nazism, eugenics, and this is also tied in with this trend that we're seeing in which people are becoming more and more sympathetic to Hitler, and we are seeing Hitler making a comeback on the internet. And so what really got me was the comments. So this video has over 1 million views in just 9 months, and this video has over 4,700 comments, so 4,776 comments total. And I spent some time looking at these comments, and let me just make sure that you guys can see them. You guys cannot see them completely, so let me just, there we go. And the comments really get me here. There are so many comments of people just sympathizing with Hitler. In 1933, they stopped paying the banks. It's very simple. They took control of their new currency, and by 1939, the job was done. It's a fascinating story. Man, this comment section is refreshing. Truth fears no investigation. So in other words, it's great that people are now seeing Hitler in a positive light. My stepfather was Danish. He told me Hitler gave rousing speeches and the people loved him with all of their heart. The media always tells us what happened, but never the story behind why it happened. My great-grandfather fought for the Wehrmacht for the Army Group C in 1940. He survived the war, and he told my dad and me many stories about the war. I'm now 41, and I've learned so much about the war and stories that you never hear. Also, fun fact, Hitler launched first anti-smoking campaign, and he really loved animals. You don't really see a whole lot of comments by people saying, huh, you know, guys, Hitler was evil, don't forget. You see a lot of comments of people rationalizing Hitler, of people admiring Hitler, of people being sympathetic to Hitler. The USA spent 10 years, let me just make sure you guys can see this. Yeah, here it is. The USA spent 10 years in a Great Depression. Aldi took, this is a typo of some sort, it took Germany out of the Depression with 1 year, or Adolf, sorry, he's trying to say Adolf here. Adolf took Germany out of the Depression within 1 year, and the next 9 years were some of the most productive and happy years Germany ever had. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. People are still way off on this subject. The stab in the back myth was real. And the stab in the back myth was something that, it was a narrative that was very popular before Hitler took power. It basically said that the Jews stabbed Germany in the back because during World War I, this is what the narrative stated. I'm not saying it's true, but this is what was being said before Hitler took power. So understand that, YouTube, okay? Just hear me out. before Hitler took power, there was this very popular view that it was Jewish people who pushed for workers' strikes during World War I, and so the factories were not being fully productive because workers went on strike due to Jewish provocateurs. And so this narrative became famously known at that time as the stab in the back, saying that the Jews stabbed Germany in the back. And this was one of the main reasons as to why people started to really hate Jews before Hitler even took power. And it says here that Weimar Germany and its controllers were real. The Treaty of Versailles was crippling and unjust, etc., etc. So a lot of sympathy for the Third Reich. And I can just go on and on. I mean, there are thousands of comments here. And it really, really shows that we are changing as a society, guys. The idea that Nazism is evil and Nazis were evil, the SS was evil, Hitler was evil, this is all beginning to dissipate, right? It's dissipating as a mainstream view. Now, you will always have people who are going to know and believe that Nazism is evil and that Hitler was evil. But my point is that the idea that Nazism is evil, being a common belief, as a common belief, is going to dissipate. And we are seeing it happening right before our eyes. And it's very, very scary. So what do we see going on? We see major influencers like Chris Williamson pushing for eugenics. And we see more and more people being sympathetic to Adolf Hitler. It's pretty horrifying. And this is happening already in our own time. So what's the world going to look like in the next 10 to 15, even 20 years? Not good. It's going to be quite scary, and we are heading towards, well, we are heading towards history. We are returning to the evils of the past. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.